Those of you who were here last Sunday, I think we were looking at what is called the Bodhi Dhamma. That's the 37 requisites or factors of enlightenment or awakening. Yeah, and I mentioned to you that actually it's a whole list. You got 37, but actually two very important keywords from there, if you remember, would be mindfulness and effort. Right? And if you look at the 37 factors of enlightenment, you find that the word the mindfulness would appear like 7 times, and then the effort would appear like 8 times. So that shows you how important these two requisites are compared to all the rest. But of course, it doesn't mean that the rest are not important. But what is important is that these 37 factors or 37 requisites of enlightenment, they are supposed to help us to transform ourselves in terms of body, speech, and mind. All right, and you all know that our actions are manifested through body, speech, and mind. So these are the 3 Dhamma doors, or the 3 doors, which are very important. So all these 37 factors of enlightenment, I think there's a lot of echo at the back, right? So they are actually aimed towards that. Now, I also mentioned to you last week that I will maybe select one, since it's a 2-part series, to talk to you, to pick one of the sets. There are 7 sets, right? If you look at the 37 factors of enlightenment. So pick one set which is called the Iddhipadas, or the 4 bases of success. Okay? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now, the 4 bases of success, or Iddhipadas, I think not many people may be familiar with it. I think many people are familiar with, for example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana. People are familiar with the 7 factors of enlightenment, and obviously the Eightfold Path. So I think I also mentioned last week, if you were here, is that the ground or the fundamentals for all these 37 factors of enlightenment, actually you look at, actually is the Eightfold Path. All right, so ultimately it's the Eightfold Path. If you look at the 37 factors of enlightenment. And today when I talk to you about the 4 bases of success, again you can see how it is really grounded in actually the Eightfold Path. All right, and of course you know the Eightfold Path is itself the 4th of the 4 Noble Truths. So we cannot run away from the most important teaching that the Buddha has given us, which is the 4 Noble Truths. Right? So today we're going to touch a little bit 4 bases of success. I think it's very easy to understand. I've been listening and reading teachings by this Thai monk called Payutto. Some of you may have heard of his name. He has many names, right? He is also Rajavara Muni. Right? So each time they go on, they get upgraded. I think today he's a Somdet in the Thai Sangha, so very high level. So, but he's known as Payut or Payutto, and he has many teachings. And one of it he talks about is the Iddhipadas, the 4 bases of success. And he said that in Thailand, most Thai student or Thai adult, they will know what the 4 Iddhipadas are, the 4 bases of success, and they always relate it to worldly success. Right? In other words, success in your studies, success in maybe even your marriage, success in your business, success in your career. So they've utilized 4 bases of success as a very important tool, which actually helps them in their everyday life. All right? Which brings us to a very important point, that the Buddha's teachings is not only for you once a week when you come to temple on Sunday, or neither is it only for you when you go on retreats, all right? Maybe twice or 3 times a year. The Dhamma is something that actually for us to apply in our everyday life. Okay? And there are many teachings in the Buddha's canon, for example. Like, for example, from mindfulness, I think last week I also alluded to the fact that today mindfulness is not only used as a form of for spiritual, but also used as a form of therapy to help people suffering chronic pain, all right? People who are suffering a lot of stress, like there's a very famous called mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. So medical doctors have utilized mindfulness in that context, right? But that's on a secular, not purely spiritual perspective. But still, it has got a good use, isn't it? All right, because if you remember, the aim of Buddhism is to help us alleviate our suffering. And we have a lot of suffering, right? Not only spiritual, but even everyday life. I think another very important teaching is compassion. I think for a long time, people think compassion is something you only talk in temples or maybe even in churches, right? It's not something that you bring up in management, right? But today, compassion is actually a very important tool which is used in leadership, for example. And a good example is if you look at, if you Google Stanford University, I'm sure you know where Stanford University, one of the best well-known universities in the world. Stanford University, in its medical school, has got a faculty called C-Care, which is Center for the Study of Compassion and Altruism. And that is been used by leaders in management, in leadership, all right? In my very own organization itself, our chairman actually uses logic, compassion, and a sense of urgency as 3 key criteria to drive our business philosophy. So here you see, compassion is also used. So why is compassion so important? But that's from a worldly sense. Okay, so which means that if you understand Buddhism, you apply the Buddha's teachings, it helps you not only in your spiritual life, but it actually helps you in your worldly life, in your career. I assume all of you are still lay people, right? So you still need to earn a living, isn't it? So I think that becomes very useful. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 bases of success, but because it's a Dhamma talk, right? So I'm going to talk more from the spiritual side and how we could glean from the Pali Tipitaka, right? If I'm speaking to my colleagues, right, like 2 weeks ago when I'm talking to my American colleagues in Atlanta, so I talk to them about compassion, but I don't use the word karuna, for example. So I have to relate it in a very secular way that they can understand how compassion, how is it linked to humility. I have to bring in people like Jim Collins when he talks about excellence in leadership. And then you can see that all these things actually has got its roots in the Dharma. All right, but of course, I cannot say that, all right? But today, I'm going to talk to you more on how the 4 bases of success are looked at primarily from the Pali Canon, okay? So let's look at the first one. Just a few slides here to take you through. So the Iddhipadas, okay? This is from the Virada Sutta. It says that bhikkhus refers to monks, right? Or actually the word bhikkhus, if you look at the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta, I think even many scholars, Bhikkhu Bodhi and many other monks have explained that the word bhikkhu actually can also mean anyone who is on the spiritual path. All right? So it need not necessarily means only monks. Right? So it could mean nuns, it could mean lay people who are on the spiritual path. So in this Virada Sutta, which is found in the book of Connected Discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, he says, bhikkhus, those who have neglected the 4 bases of spiritual power, have neglected the noble path leading to the complete destruction of suffering. All right? And those who have undertaken the 4 bases for spiritual power have undertaken the noble path leading to the destruction of suffering. So what is the aim of us studying and practicing Dharma? All right? So here it says that leading to the complete destruction of suffering. Now, if we are not careful, then we only get half the story. In fact, if you just ask someone who has been studying Buddhism for some time, if you ask them, think of one word, what actually comes to the mind? He will probably say, oh, Buddhism is about suffering. Which I think is not really a complete picture, isn't it? Even though the Buddha did talk about suffering, but I think the main thrust of his teaching is actually how do we overcome suffering, not suffering. We need to understand suffering, we need to understand dukkha, but I think more important is actually what we do to overcome dukkha. And when you overcome dukkha, you experience happiness. All right? And research has shown that if you are happy, the probability of you being successful in your career is much higher. A lot of research have shown that. All right? So today's talk is about success. So while success is important, I think a key ingredient is, does it lead us to happiness? Success may not necessarily lead to happiness, but if you're happy, right, then that may probably most likely lead you to success. So here, the Buddha talks about understanding the iddhipadas help us to actually overcome our suffering. So from the spiritual side. Okay? So suffering plays a very important role, but we have to understand this word suffering correctly. Otherwise we get a very negative, very pessimistic view. Okay? I always like this story which I heard many years ago. Some of you have heard of this name, Jack Confield. I mentioned Jack Confield, I think last week. I also mentioned that there's a meditation center in Barre, Massachusetts, called Insight Meditation Society, started by three Americans in the Mahasi lineage, Jack Confield, Joseph Goldstein, and Sharon Salzberg. Now, this is a very interesting story about Jack Confield. When he was one of the early disciples of the late Ajahn Chah, right? The early disciple, probably during Ajahn Sumido's time. So he said that when he was ordained, all right, they go through the usual ordination ceremony, rituals, and so on. So after that has gone through, then he met Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah told Jack Confield, he said, "Congratulations, welcome to suffering." So Jack Confield, being a newly initiated monk, was very surprised. He said, what do you mean, welcome to suffering? All right? And Ajahn Chah said to Jack Confield, there are two types of suffering. All right? There are two types of suffering. The one type of suffering is the one that you always run away from, but it follows you everywhere you go. So that's the first type of suffering. He said the second type of suffering, he told Jack Confield, is that there's the type of suffering where you confront it, you face it, and then you're able to turn it around. And then that is the gateway to happiness. So Ajahn Chah was essentially, knowing maybe the mental faculty of Jack Confield, gave him something that really makes him think. All right. So in the end, it's recognizing, confronting suffering that becomes the gateway to happiness. All right. And I think till today, Jack Confield, even though he's no longer a monk, but he spent, he's a full-time Dhamma teacher. All right. So these people are so inspired, and he mentioned, for example, the 4 bases of power as one of the examples. Okay. So we must be very careful when we hear the word suffering. So do not see suffering as an end in itself, because I don't think that's the intention of the Buddha, because the Buddha spent 45 years teaching us the way to end suffering. I don't think he spent 45 years telling us what is suffering and how to suffer more, isn't it? I don't think that was his intention. His intention was actually to teach us how to understand suffering, like Ajahn Chah told Jack Confield, so that when you can confront it, you know how to face it, and you know the gateway for happiness. So I think that's a very wonderful story which I always remember, right? Jack Confield. Okay, let's move on then. Huh? So maybe a quick definition. The word Pali term Iddhi means power, success, accomplishment, or potency, and Pada means base or basis. So the basis for mental or psychic power. Sometimes in the text you hear this word iddhipadas as psychic powers, right? Yes, there's a sutta called the Iddhi, the Vibhanga Iddhi. There's a sutta which actually talks about how you develop these powers. You can also develop psychic powers. But I think we're not talking so much about those psychic powers, right? So there are 4 qualities essential for success in any task in one's domestic, social, professional, even spiritual life. So that's the given, right? So it helps us. So let's see what are these. Let's run through there are 4 of them. So they are essentially in Pali they are called chanda. I think there's a wrong switch. It should be desire, then effort, then mind, and then inquiry. All right. So it should be chanda. The next one instead of mind should be effort or virya, and then should be the mind or chitta, and then inquiry. So in this Iddhipada Vibhanga Sutta itself, if you read this discourse, what the Buddha essentially says is that if these 4 bases of power are conducive for concentration. So that is why if you read this sutta, you find that words like chanda, samadhi will appear. Virya Samadhi will appear, Chitta Samadhi will appear, and Vimamsa Samadhi will appear. So which means that if you develop these 4 bases of power, it actually leads to concentration. And we know that in life, for you to be successful, you need to concentrate, isn't it? Right? If you don't concentrate on your work, you're not going to make it. Right? Okay? If you work in an organization, you don't concentrate on your work, your performance is going to be affected, isn't it? Right? Probably at the year-end performance appraisal, your supervisor is going to call you up and say, hey, the past 1 year, you don't seem to be concentrating on your work. So the word concentration can be used in a very loose sense. Okay? But in the Iddhipada Vibhanga Sutta, the Buddha says, actually, concentration is needed. And concentration is just 8 of the Eightfold Path, right? Isn't it? So here, again, I think last week I also mentioned to you that while everybody can develop mindfulness, you can develop mindfulness to the extent that you become a very skilled, sharp shooter, You can you can kill your enemy, because you're so focused with mindfulness and concentrated in your mind. But that's not right mindfulness from the Buddhist context. Buddhist context is right mindfulness, right? So you can have wrong mindfulness, it's still mindfulness, and it leads to wrong concentration. Right? So here from the spiritual context, we're talking about what constitutes right mindfulness. And right mindfulness is always linked with panya, wisdom. You must always have wisdom. So it links us back to the Eightfold Path, the first pair. What is wisdom? Right thoughts and right understanding. So when you have right understanding, you have right thoughts. Would you have a thought of harming someone? If you have a thought of trying to harm someone, no matter how mindful you are in that act, you're trying to steal something, you can be very mindfully stealing your neighbor's money. Or you can very mindfully, you can execute a plan with full concentration to rob a bank. You can do that. But we don't call it as right mindfulness. So that is still mindfulness. Okay, so here in the Buddhist context, we are very clear what we mean by right mindfulness. And right mindfulness is always linked to panya. How do we know that? In the 37 factors of enlightenment, the Bodhipakkhiya Dhamma, the first pair is satipatthana, isn't it? The 4 right mindfulness, right? So mindfulness is always, for mindfulness to work, it needs two other companions. One is there must be the effort. If there's no effort, there's no mindfulness. Of course, in the Satipatthana Sutta, the word effort, virya, is not used. They use another term, atapi, right? And then there's another word which some of you may or may not have heard. It's called sampajana. Right? I think some of you have heard. If you have practiced meditation, probably you have heard of this word. Sampajana comes from the word jnana, which means wisdom. That means, while mindfulness only pays attention to the object, sampajana comes in and say whether is it wholesome, is it unwholesome, is it skillful, is it unskillful. You see, so all 3 they revolve around mindfulness. So mindfulness by itself, while it is important, but is not enough. So you need to be balanced with wisdom. And of course you must have effort, it's understood. Okay, so let's go back to the first one, which is chanda. Now, desires. You see, we have used the word desires. Again, just like the word suffering, many people also have the impression that you study Buddhism, you practice Buddhism, the end result is we have no more desires. So can we live without desires? Right? Sometimes you hear, what is the aim of Buddhism? So that we have no more desires. Wow. So you live like a robot? Now they say even robot got desires. Right? All right. So how do you live? How do you do that? So the Buddha makes a distinction between 2 types of desires. That's why in Pali there are 2 words here. One is called Dhamma-chanda, and the other one is called Kama-chanda. Kama as in the Kamesu Michachara, that Kama. This morning you recited the 3rd precept, right? The 3rd precept is Kamesu Michachara. So Kamesu comes from the word Kama, K-A-M-A. The same Kama as, naughty boys, they like to read the Kama Sutra, You know Kama Sutra? You don't, so you're all good people, good boys and girls, so you don't know what is Kama Sutra, okay? Naughty boys, I don't know about girls, but naughty boys like to read Kama Sutra. So the Kama is K-A-M-A, different from K-A-M-M-A. You're familiar with K-A-M-M-A, right? Kama means action, isn't it? Or sometimes in Sanskrit, K-A-R-M-A, karma. So that means action. Every day we perform actions. But there's another word called Kama, K-A-M-A. So that one means like desires, sexual desires, lusts. Right? So be careful of the word. You minus one M, it means something else, right? Okay, so that is Kama Chanda. Kama Chanda. So here we are talking about Dhamma Chanda. Now where do you see this word Kama Chanda? Where do you see that word? Do you know? Many of you have learned meditation, you practice meditation. In meditation, what is it that you try to reduce, you try to eventually, maybe dilute it? The five hindrances, right? 5 hindrances. So the first one is called Kama Chanda, isn't it? The first of the 5 hindrances. Okay? So here we're talking about something wholesome, something positive. So it's called Dhamma Chanda. So again, it is wrong for us to say the aim of Buddhism is to teach us to have no desires. That's absolutely rubbish. Because the Buddha talks about we must have desires. You have no desires, how are you going to have if you have no desires, you wouldn't be here this morning, isn't it? You have no desires, you will not even embark on a meditation session, right? Because you have that desire. But that desire is based on understanding, it's based on something wholesome. So that's called Chanda. All right, so let's see what is this Chanda all about. So types of desires, I've already explained. Wholesome desires, when based on the wholesome roots of non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. So when you have that type of desires, it leads to wholesome mental states and spiritual progress. But if every day you only have Kama Chanda, you not only read Kama Sutra, you watch all sorts of videos that just incense your desires and lust and so on. So you create unwholesome desires. So when based on unwholesome roots of greed, hatred, and delusion, all right? Or sometimes, sometimes the disadvantage today of those chats, those WhatsApp chats. Sometimes, I look at my WhatsApp chat. People just send something. You read it. You just provoke more anger. So it's not meant for harmony, but just for disharmony, and in the process, people just use very strong words, so all this thing agitates the mind, isn't it? It agitates the mind. The question I always ask is, that is just a matter of opinion, isn't it? People like to take sides, the war in Ukraine, you don't like, now people don't like Americans, so whatever China does is great, is fantastic, right? But speak to the Tibetans, speak to the Taiwanese, speak to the Uyghurs. They have a totally different view about China, isn't it? But then because of our perspective of things, we look at things from one angle. We don't see the whole picture. All right? So you create unwholesome desires when the roots of greed, hatred, sometimes you create conditions for hatred to arise in other people, all right, and delusion. So what happens? It leads to unwholesome mental states with negative effects on one's spiritual progress. Okay, so these are so we have to be careful. As I mentioned at the start of today's talk, that the whole idea of understanding the 37 factors of enlightenment is to check ourselves whether through our body, speech, and mind, what type of thoughts that arise. Okay? So from the spiritual success, in the discourse, it says that to attain awakening, we need to sustain our deep interest in Dhamma practice. So we must have that interest, because Dhamma Chanda means that interest. Just as for you to be successful in your work, you must be interested, right? If you're not interested in the job that you're doing, you think you're going to be successful? I don't think so. I really do not think so. All right? And before long, if you're the boss, you will know that, hey, this staff of mine, he just have no interest in his job. So when you have no interest in what you're doing, you cannot be successful. Why? Because when you have no interest, That's what Dhammachanda means. You have an interest. You have no interest, you have no joy. When we look back, when we were students in schools or in universities, we tend to do well in the subject if you like the teacher, isn't it? Right? You would think, but I remember very clearly in my lower secondary, I liked my science teacher very much, but so I liked his subject, so I did well in science. But when I was in secondary school, I hated my science teacher. And that's why I never became a science graduate. Okay, so I think there's some truth in it. You like something, you tend to do well. You don't like it, you just do it. We said, well, I'm just here to do a job, But there's no passion in it. There's no love for it, and chances of you being successful will be less. So there's no joy in it. Right? So Dhammachanda means, for example, to attain awakening, do we have joy in the Dhamma? If, for example, when it comes to Saturday, then you think, oh, the following day is Sunday, and you dread Sunday because you have to come to temple. Can you imagine that? There's no joy in coming to temple. Or because all your friends go for meditation, you say, oh yeah, I want to be part of the group, so I also join meditation. But you don't enjoy it. You think it's a waste of time, So if you don't have that interest, so here it says 2 factors to generate that willpower, that interest. So and another explanation for Dhammachanda is that interest, strong interest in whatever you're doing. So here in the sutta, the Buddha says 2 things. One will be external, good friends to give advice. So that's why Kalyana Mittas are very important. All right. So in the Buddhist tradition, Ananda, I'm sure you have heard, once told the Buddha that he told the Buddha was very proudly, he said, half the holy life comprises of friendship. And the Buddha corrected Ananda and said, Ananda, is not half the holy life. The entire holy life comprises friendship. So the importance of spiritual friends are very important. In the Tibetan tradition, this word Geshe, isn't it? You've heard, like you go to the Tibetan center in section 17, you see Geshe Sundu. So you meet Geshe Sundu. So the word Geshe actually means, come from the Pali word Kalyana Mitta. So he's a friend. Right? So that's the importance of friendship. So one is the friend. The other one is internal. In others, that kind of interest must come from internal. Friends are just external, right? They are external to you. But what is important is to develop something internal. Okay? So joy and happiness. Why? Because they act as inspiration. Right? I remember many years ago when I was in the insurance industry, insurance agents, I don't know, maybe some of your insurance agents, they always like to have this motivation talk. So my boss always said, you get this motivated to talk, it's just like a jab of morphine. He gets high, he gets excited, you go out, try to close some cases. After that, he's back to square one. So he must have that built-in that desire. And how do you do it? Through education. So my boss said, we must give them education. So we sign up with LIMRA, to make sure that these people understand the nature of the job and why that insurance, for example, is a noble business. So forget about insurance agents being one who shed crocodile tears. So you paint a very positive. So they feel proud about it. So that inspirations come from within, not by someone who motivates you with his talk. Okay. So external and internal, even our spiritual practice. So good friends are the highest blessings. I think in the Mangala Sutta, isn't it? The Mangala Sutta, the Buddha talks about 38 types of blessings. And one of the 38 blessings is to associate with good friends. Right? Okay, all those characteristics, they don't flatter us, they can be direct with our faults, they remind us to observe our precepts, they inspire with a peaceful lifestyle. Do you have friends who do that to you? All right? Or who do just the reverse? Okay? Internal support. Internal support, how do we develop that joy? So that our mind always turns towards Dhamma for joy and happiness. In the Tibetan tradition, at the start of their teachings, they always have this, what is called preliminary practice, which are called to understand 4 things that turns the mind towards Dharma. So in other words, for us to reflect on 4 things. If we constantly reflect on these 4 things, then eventually, slowly, our mind turns towards Dharma. The first one is to contemplate, reflect this precious human life that we have, this human body that we have. All right? Even though it is fragile, it's a precious body. You can do so many things with that body, right? The precious human life. And even in the Pali tradition, we read in the Chigala Sutta, we read in the Devadutta Sutta, the Buddha talks about the analogy of the one-eyed turtle who lives at the bottom of the ocean, who comes out maybe once in 100 years and then try to poke its neck into a yolk that floats aimlessly in the ocean, in the surface of the water. So how difficult it is to be born as a human. To be born as human even more difficult. And all of us are born as humans, all right? Unless there are some devas who are in human form here. Right? I think we are all humans, all right? And then, but at the same time, we also reflect, while we have this human life, how long can we live? I don't know, 80, if you're like Mahathir, maybe you live about 90 plus, right? But essentially, we live up to, 80, 85, maybe if you're lucky, right? And healthy again. Our life is very impermanent, it's transient, it's always subject to change. It's permanent, impermanent. Eventually, they say that birth is the forward view of death. Have you heard of the expression? When you are born, you are actually, it's like that what they call that sand glass, that sand glass when you pour it the other way around. It's a matter of time when every tiny bit of sand would be gone. So birth is the forward view of death. The moment you are born, you're actually heading towards death. It's a fact. You may not like to hear it, right? But that's a fact. So we know that impermanence is a nature. That's why the Buddha says there are 3 characteristics of existence. The first one is impermanence. Understanding impermanence is really, really crucial for us. Yeah? And then not only understanding impermanence, understanding that every action that we do have consequences. So we must always remember that. We must always understand that every action, be it through body, through speech, and through the mind, have got consequences. And that's the law of karma. Right? Because if you understand the law of consequences or the law of karma, then you understand that why there is samsara. Because samsara is not perfect. Right? Like, each time I always remember when one of his students came to see him and said, "Oh, Rinpoche, I've got this problem," or "Rinpoche, I got a problem." And Lama Zopa would say, "What do you expect? Samsara is imperfect." Samsara is just not perfect. And we are in samsara, so how could we be perfect? Right? But the aim of Buddhist practice is how do we get out of samsara, isn't it? So that we attain awakening. We attain. So these are the 4 things. So if we spend our time in meditation, there are different types of meditation, like in the Tibetan tradition, they talk about analytical meditation. So analytical meditation, before we start Vipassana, so we will reflect on these 4 things. So these 4 things essentially give us that grounding in our everyday life. All right? Okay? So it starts off very positive, precious human life. We are proud of this, that this mind has got great potential. It can do great things. But it is impermanent. So let's do it now. Let's not wait. All right? So it becomes very positive in that sense. Okay? And because you understand that every action has consequences, so based on right understanding, you only want to do wholesome actions so that you get wholesome results. You see, so they're all interlinked. So if you constantly reflect on these 4 things, so joy arises. You feel happy. You're not worried. Okay? So this one helps you to sustain the interest in the Dhamma. That's why it's called Dhamma Chanda. Okay? So worldly success, all right? So I think I mentioned this, I'll just skip this. Now, efforts. So for you to have interest, that interest must always be coupled by virya. This word virya, it comes from what word? A word I think all of you are familiar with. What do you think this word virya comes from? All of you understand Malay, isn't it? What is the Malay word that's closely associated with virya? Do you know? There's a proton car called Proton Vira.
Oh, Vira.
Vira. What is the meaning of Vira?
Hero.
Hero. What is the characteristics of a hero? Courage. bravery, isn't it? So that's the meaning of viriya. So viriya means to have that courage, to have that bravery to do it. You have that interest, do it. All right? You have that interest to practice the Dharma. You have that interest to, for example, to accept that position as the CEO of an organization. Make sure you take the challenge, that energy, that strength, that viriya, that, right? You know, our Malay language has a lot of these words, right? So you got proton vira, and then early on, when I was starting my career, there was like many moons ago, right? There's a car called Proton Ishvara, you know? I don't know, is it still around, Proton Ishvara? No more already, right? Is there still Proton Ishvara? Still got? Do you know what does Ishvara means? You don't know also. How can you drive that car, you don't know what is it? Ishvara is the name of the Indian god, Isa. And the Chinese call Tikong, Sakadevaraja. Sakadevaraja, but in the Hindu tradition, there's Isara. So in the Brahmajala Sutta, you've heard of Brahmajala Sutta, right? The first discourse of the long discourses. And there's a view, a wrong view, which is called Isara Diti. Isara Diti. That's a wrong view. So it's a wrong view to believe in a creator God. It's a wrong view. Okay? So one of the 62 wrong views. But of course you drive that car, it's fine. you need not worry about having wrong views in driving that car. If the car is still around, I don't even know. Because I remember when there was, I don't know how many years ago, long ago. One of the first cars, Proton Saga, then Proton Ishvara, isn't it? Yeah. Those were the days, right? Okay, so effort means that energy or that heroic challenge that you would undertake. And of course, I'm not going to go through this. I think you're familiar with this. Last week I also talked to you. In they are called the 4 padanas, right? The 4 right efforts. If you go through the Eightfold Path, when it comes to right effort, what does the right effort here there refers to? It refers to, for example, these 4 things: the effort to prevent unskillful thoughts from arising, effort to abandon already arisen unskillful thoughts, effort to make sure that only skillful thoughts will arise in your mind, and then once it arises, sustain it, keep it. I think last week I also mentioned to you, the first pair will be like your 5 hindrances, isn't it? Your 5 hindrances. So you try to prevent the hindrances from arising. Anger, for example, from arising. But what happens if that anger did arise? Then you try to overcome it. And the Buddha gave different techniques, different methodology. Last week I also mentioned to you, the Buddha gave, for example, the Vitakka Santana Sutta. So in the Vitakka Santana Sutta, the Buddha talks about five methods how you can overcome distracting thoughts or unwholesome thoughts. So you see, the Buddha gave us very clear instructions. The question is where to find them only, right? Right, so that's where you have a Dhamma class like this. So hopefully you can go to it. So the first pair is actually about the hindrances. Understand the hindrances, prevent them from arising, and if they do arise, how do you overcome them? Get rid of them. Okay? The second pair is skillful states. Now, in the context of the Dhamma, Bodhipakkhiya Dhamma, what would this be? What is the reverse of, instead of 5 hindrances, what would be the positive aspects of the 5 hindrances? Do you know? If you were here last week, we talked about 7 sets. Which of the sets would be this? The 7 factors of enlightenment, right? The bojjhangas, right? The bojjhangas. And the first is, you have a combination. You have mindfulness, and so on. Okay, so you use effort. So you got the first pair, which is hindrances, and then the second pair will be the 7 factors of awakening, right? So but why do we encourage us to always have skillful states? Again, so that we develop what is called habitual. So we create habits, right? In life, we are creatures of habits, isn't it? Right? We live on habits. So the question is, if you understand the Buddha's teachings, what kind of habits do we create? What kind of habits do we develop? Because you understand that all actions have consequences. So creating habits is the causes. And what is the consequences? Good habits you have good consequences. Bad habits, you have bad consequences. If you tell yourself, Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to do nothing, I'm just going to sleep until maybe 10 a.m., wake up, eat, and maybe afternoon go and sleep again, or watch television. So you develop that kind of lifestyle, before long, it becomes second nature, isn't it? It becomes habitual. All right? It becomes habitual. So we are all creatures of habits. And the Buddha says it is easier for us to develop negative habits than positive habits. Positive habits, you need effort. Negative habits, very, very easy, isn't it? Okay? So that's what the Buddha mentioned. So that's on efforts. Now here in the discourse, I'm just picking the summary of what the discourse explained. The cause of the arising of effort is a sense of spiritual urgency. Now this is from the spiritual sense, right? Samvega. Some of you heard it, Samvega. Samvega means when one reflects on birth, old age, disease, death, and suffering in samsara. Like just now I mentioned the 4 thoughts that turns the mind towards Dharma. So when you constantly reflect on that, then you develop what is called Samvega. Right? Or in the Pali tradition, we talk about the 5 things we should constantly reflect. Remember? You are all Pali students, right? Because you're all very strong Theravada based, right? So I'm sure you've heard of this called Upajatana Sutta. 5 things for us to contemplate every day. Birth, old age, sickness, death, karma. We are heirs to the Dhamma. Right? Interestingly, today's topic, Babs has called it what? Heirs of the Dhamma. So that's the topic for today. The title is it? Heirs of the Dhamma. Someone asked me, who is an heir to the Dhamma? Okay, so the samsara. In samsara, you got the lower realms. You got the higher. Even higher realms is unsatisfactory, right? In the Deva realms also is unsatisfactory. Past life, future lives, and suffering for food in this life. Don't you think that's also a form of, a hassle? Sometimes you're wondering, what I'm going to eat, right? And sometimes people, for example, one of our business is in Sungai Buloh, and we always have a problem finding people to work in Sungai Buloh. Because they say, Sungai Buloh, that kind of place, where to eat? No place to eat. Then I say, wait, don't forget we have another business in Banting that's even worse. Who wants to go to Banting for that matter? Everybody wants to work in our business in Petaling Jaya because we have an office in Jaya 33, So everybody likes that kind of place. So, even food. And the main criteria why people don't want to work in a particular place, don't have food. Okay, so food itself becomes a form of dukkha, isn't it, for people. So for effort, we need perseverance. So desire alone is not enough unless accompanied by right effort to persevere with the task until its completion, despite distraction and obstacles along the way. One of my bosses in my previous organization, he always tells me, you must always have tenacity. You must be tenacious. You must be like a dog. You bite on it, don't let go. He always tell me, I told him, boss, I say, I'm not like you, I can't do that. All right, okay, because he owns the company. I mean, I don't own the company. All right, so, but having said that, I think tenacity or perseverance is very important. It's very important, right? So because if you don't have perseverance, you just give up, isn't it? You just give up, all right? So tenacity, that's the other word, right? Tenacity. So one with right effort will not hesitate to begin the spiritual journey even though it is arduous and tough, and will have courage. That's why the word vira. That's why the word effort comes from the word vira. Vira means a hero. A hero has got courage, isn't it? Right? You watch movies about the heroes, they go to battle. In the old days, the general is always in front, isn't it? They fight the war. But today, where are the generals? The generals are always at the back, right? At the back in the mission control room, to see which drones to send out, right? But having said that, in the war in Ukraine, strangely enough, a lot of Russian generals got killed, right? So one with right effort will not hesitate to begin the spiritual journey, even though it is arduous and tough, right? And will have courage despite severe setbacks on the way. So that is why I think a gradual way is very important, a gradual path. Don't overdo it. So effort also talks about trying to find the right balance. You remember the parable of the lute, L-U-T-E, the musical instrument, where Prince Siddhartha, when he was aspiring for enlightenment, while he was seated under the Bodhi tree, first time he heard the sound from the forest. The first sound that he heard wasn't nice. And then when he inquired why, he found that, the sound from that musical instrument, the strings were too loose. They were just too loose. You play a guitar, if the string are too loose, the sound is not going to be nice. So he went back on his meditation. Second time he heard, this time the sound was also not nice. When he inquired, the sound from the lute, the strings, were too tight. So it wasn't nice. So he went, third time he heard, this time the sound was just nice. The strings were not too loose, the strings were not too tight. So that means in our practice, we need to know. For example, in the 5 hindrances, isn't it? When we do meditation, all right, we have got these two friends who always will be with us. One is called sloth and torpor. And the other one is called restlessness and worry, isn't it? They are our friends. they are always our friends. They will always be there. So instead of making them our enemies, try to recognize them. If sloth and torpor arise, try to understand what is the cause. Maybe you ate too much, right? Or you ate too much. So you generally get sleepy, isn't it? Right? You, especially lunch, then 2 o'clock you're supposed to listen to a Dhamma talk, sure fall asleep. Best time for siesta. Right? Or you were too tired. The past 2-3 days you have been very busy with the business plan in your organization because of financial year end, and then maybe your company didn't meet target, so you're very stressed out, So then, immediately next day you come and sit for meditation. Obviously, your mind is going to get very restless. You'll be wondering, after you finish this meditation, you go back, you may no longer have your job already. So you'll be very restless, isn't it? When your mind is very restless, it will be very difficult for us to put in the right effort. So the Buddha's advice are always very, very sound. In a sense, it tells us always to recognize, this is what the mindfulness of the mind, isn't it? Citta nupassana, right? So that you know what thoughts are arising. So once you recognize it, then it can be diluted. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was once asked, he said, Your Holiness, people say you're a Buddha, you're an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara. Do you ever get angry? Then he laughed. He said, of course, if you ask stupid questions, I get angry with you. But then he said, well, the thing is, if I get angry, I can recognize that anger have arisen. Then I try to recognize it, so my anger is diluted. So you can be sure I will not give you a tight slap. So I mean he turned it around in a very jovial manner. All right. So we must always have that balance. That balance is very important. Courage, yes. Perseverance, yes. Tenacity, yes. Like my boss tells me, right? That's very important. But at the end of the day, it's a courage and then that balance in whatever you do. Okay. Now here again, the discourses talks about 3 phases of effort. This is just again, you see, the Buddha was very systematic, isn't it? In his teachings, he was really very methodical. All right. He's like a surgeon. He said, before you do any effort, you think what happens required to begin a particular action. It's before. Effort required to sustain an action while they're doing it, and then after that to continue after. So you always look in terms of what happens before, the present, and then the future. And in the same way, he told his son, Rahula, you remember? In the discourse, the Buddha told Rahula, whatever action that you want to do, whether through body, through speech, or mind, always reflect that action before you do it, while you're doing it, and after you have done it. Reflect on what? Whether that action leads to, whether that is a skillful action that leads to happiness for yourself and for others, or is it an unskillful action for yourself and for others. Before you do it, while you're doing it, and after you're doing it. You remember that discourse? The Chula Rahula Wada Sutta, isn't it? So it's a beautiful sutta where the Buddha gave specific instructions. So it's not always that the Buddha only talks about how many thought moments make one thought process. So not only necessary that. He gives very clear instruction for us in our everyday life. Right? And if we apply it, we make our life more meaningful. So the clearer we know what we want in life, the more focus we have towards our goal. So we'll put all our physical and mental energy towards that direction and not waste time in life doing other useless things. We will also moderate our effort, not too much and not too little. I think I mentioned that to you. Okay, let's look at the third one, right? The mind. So it's called chitta. So just as, for example, when you have chanda, which is the desire or the interest, if you do it well with right effort, it will lead to chanda samadhi. So effort will lead to virya samadhi. So you have chitta. So what is this chitta here? This chitta is the mind. All right? For example, it says when we first sit down to meditate, the best strategy is to simply notice whatever state of our body and mind is present. Right? That's what Chittanupassana is all about, to recognize your mind states. It says that if anger arises, you recognize that anger has arisen. If anger has not arisen, you also know anger has not arisen. If lust or greed have arisen, you know greed or lust have arisen. Okay? So you're able to recognize it. So with mindfulness, if we observe if the body and mind are distracted, or is it steady? Is it angry? Is it peaceful? Are we excited? Are we worried? Is the mind contracted, or is it released? Or is it bound, or is it free? I'm sure we can recognize this, right? When we sit in meditation, all right? But initially, our mind runs wild, all right? In the Atthakatha, in the commentary, all right, the Buddha gave the analogy of the rope, R-O-P-E, rope, the tali, of the rope, and the cow, the animal, the wild animal, and then the pillar, the pillar. So the Buddha says that rope is mindfulness. You use that rope to tie the neck of the cow to that pillar. So the cow is our mind. That pillar is that object. So we must have an object. So mindfulness is like the rope that ties our wild mind, right? Our mental thoughts, our wild mental thought to a pillar. So you have a particular pillar. So it could be our breath, for example, isn't it? Our breath, breathing in, breathing out. Right? So the Buddha gave those analogies for us to understand that the mindfulness is important. When we do that long enough, all right, then what is the result? Concentration, you see? So concentration arises when we have mindfulness. And in all these four iddhipadas, is always based on mindfulness, isn't it? You must be mindful. For example, you have an interest in something, so you want to do it. So Dhammachanda, all right? So, but that interest you also need, is that interest that I'm doing, am I mindful of what I'm doing? Because you can do it in a very careless manner, despite you being very interested, you know, like a headless cockroach, you know. You know, headless cockroach, when you move around, it just moves in every direction. But you have a lot of interest. So you're not, that's where the mind will come to tell you to be very focused. Right? So you see, they're all actually interrelated. They are not, you cannot separate them into individual, separate compartments. They're all interrelated. Okay? So that's what is meant here when you talk about the mind. So what is the aim ultimately? Remember the word just now I said about habits? So the benefit of training the mind is to tame the mind so that when it is concentrated, it becomes calm, relaxed, and refreshed. So I think the key word is to tame the mind, not to control the mind. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, why did we learn meditation? Oh, we want to control the mind. I don't think that's the case. I think that we learn meditation because first, we want to understand our mind. When we understand our mind, we know that our mind is very, very aimless, very wild. You know, I mean, even when we are sitting here, right, you may be sitting here looking at the slides, but you could actually be thinking, what's for lunch? Right? Or you could be thinking, what a terrible dinner I had last night. Or you could be thinking, oh gee, I wonder if my neighbor, is he going to, I've got an awful neighbor, for example, is he going to come back, or is he not going to come? So your mind actually could be everywhere else except here. So while your body is here, your mind may not be here. Right? So he says the aim of meditation, or the aim of mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, is actually for us to understand our mind. That our mind is always transient, always moving. All right? So how do we tame it? Okay? Why? Because from the Buddha's teaching, if the mind is tamed, it becomes calm. Once it is calm, it's relaxed. With relaxed, then you can refresh it. Okay? Meditation can lead to beyond the pleasant states mental exercises can produce, the real payoffs of the lasting personality traits that can result. Now, these two words I've highlighted in italics, states and traits. Just introduce two terms here. So we always talk about, we have mental states, we have positive mental states, isn't it? Remember, I always said that all these mental states, I think it is not so, it will not be complete if you are only have positive mental states, if you are only able to do metta when you are sitting in meditation, or you can do metta, loving kindness, when you're in a temple. But when you're back home, you're a terrible person, no more metta, when you're back home, or when you meet your colleagues, where got metta? No metta. Meet your boss got metta, but meet your downline. Some people, they're terrible. They are very good to their bosses, but when it comes to their subordinates, they are like a devil. Right? To the boss, everything is good. So mental states keep on changing, isn't it? So how do we transform those mental states into behavioral traits? And that's the aim of meditation. Again, to remember what His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, while sitting in meditation, having a calm mind, having a peaceful mind while you are in retreat, he says that's wonderful. Please continue. Please continue to do that. But he says what is even more important, what happens after you're out from that meditation? What happens when you're not sitting on that cushion? When you're dealing with your colleagues, when you're dealing with your families, when you're dealing with someone who upsets you. Do you still have metta? Do you still have karuna? Do you still say, oh, you're a wonderful person, you are a precious human, but you're complete. So he said, if you can do that, then your meditation has worked. Right? So I think what His Holiness is saying is that whether do we convert those states into traits. And because His Holiness the Dalai Lama, since 1972, he has been asking Western psychologists and psychiatrists, please don't only focus on the negative aspects of the mind. Do you know that if you study, some of you may even be psychology majors, in the early years, psychology always studies about the crazy people, what goes on in the mind, all the negative things, why people are full of anger, the greedy part. So His Holiness in 1972 told a group of scientists why don't you psychologists study about the positive aspects of the mind? And because of that, two very important names, one name I think you all know is Daniel Goleman. You've heard of Daniel Goleman, right? Daniel Goleman is the one who wrote the book called EQ, Emotional Intelligence. All right, when I was much younger, right, I used that book a lot, in our management sessions, right? So Daniel Goleman, right, from Harvard. The other guy is a person called Richard Davidson, who is now with the University of Wisconsin. So they started a group called Mind Life Institute. It's a group of scientists. They set up a body called Mind Life Institute. And that institute is to study about the progress of meditation on how people behave. And this is a result of that book, Altered Traits. So if you're interested in how meditation can actually transform you, not only when you are sitting in the cushion, but in your everyday life, in dealing with people, I highly recommend you to read this book called Altered Traits. Science reveals how meditation changes your mind, your brain, and body. So it's written by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson. These two, if you Google Mind Life Institute, Mind Life Institute, you find a lot of research about how meditation really transforms our lives. Okay, so this is a wonderful book, Altered Traits. It's not that It's not that old, it's I think 2017, so it's about 4 or 5 years, right? Just before COVID. All right? So the last one, I've got another 5 minutes. Investigation. So this is the word for vimamsa. Vimamsa. I think, I'm sure you know the importance of investigation in Buddhism. Buddhism is one religion, if you like to call it, which does not tell you to come and believe. If someone tells you to come to Bab so that you can believe what the Buddha said, then I think you probably will be a bit misdirected. Huh? But if you are told that please come to Bab so that you can understand what the Buddha taught, then you can reflect on it, put it in practice, I think you're on the right track. So I hope no one tells you here to come here so that you believe what every Sunday the speaker is going to tell you. So please don't believe what I'm saying, okay? All right. Because in philosophy, when you believe in something means you do not know. When you know, you don't believe. Yeah, you understand? Right? When you believe in something means you do not know. So belief and knowledge are quite two different things. So in Buddhism, this morning you recited the Swakato, Bhagavato, remember? And one of the Ehi Pasiko. Ehi Pasiko. It means come and see. Come and find out. It's a compound word which means you come, yes, come to Babs and find out for yourself. Not come and believe. So that's the one. And then I'm sure you also have heard of the Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha talks about the charter of free inquiry, where the Buddha told the Kalamas, don't just believe in something just because it's passed down by tradition, just because it is believed by some spiritual people, or because logic. You see, interestingly, the Buddha said just because it's logical doesn't mean it's true. Logic and truth are two different things. All right. I remember when I was in university, maybe Chagai also studied that. I think it's called critical thinking. There's a course where I remember the lecturer says, all dogs have tail. Fifi is a dog, therefore Fifi has a tail. Logically, it's true, isn't it? But it may not be. No, logically, it's valid, but it may not be true. Logic is about validity, but it may not be true because some naughty boy just cut off Fifi's tail, so Fifi has got no tail. You see, so it's not true, but it's valid. It's a valid logic. So if you're interested in logic, in epistemology, the Buddha gave another discourse which is close to the Kalama Sutta. I always regard it as a companion to the Kalama Sutta. You know what it is called? It's actually called the Vimamsaka Sutta. Vimamsaka Sutta. So it's actually, I always call it a companion to the Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta basically tell you what not to believe. Right? So somebody says, so in the end, what to believe? Everything you tell me not to believe. So you read the Vimamsaka Sutta, then it actually leads up. So the same word, Vimamsaka, Vimamsa, it means inquiry. So a spirit of investigation is needed when developing the mental powers and maintaining the other three bases. So Vimamsa is like the base for the other three, right? And from Vimamsaka, we move on to another word which is very common in Buddhist teachings, especially when you learn meditation. It's called wise reflection. You know what is wise reflection? Yoniso manasikara. You heard of this word, right? I'm sure you have. Yoniso manasikara. All right? Yoniso manasikara means you reflect wisely. And in that discourse, all right, this is the second discourse called the Sabha Sutta. The Sabha Sutta, where the Buddha talks about Yoniso manasikara. The Buddha says for someone who reflects wisely, anxieties and troubles and problems will decline. But for someone who reflects unwisely, ayoniso manasikara, the A in front, the ayoniso manasikara, anxieties and problems and your worries only increase. Okay? So again, I don't have time to go into that, but I've given you the name of the discourse. It's called the Sabha Sutta. It's the second, I think the second discourse in the book of Middle Lang Sayings. All right? So you read that discourse, the Buddha explains how to cultivate wise reflection, yoniso manasikara, and to ensure that we don't cultivate the ayoniso manasikara, the unwise reflection. So this is again for us to do reflection. And just now I mentioned to you about the 4 thoughts that turns the mind towards Dhamma. So that's again is a form of reflection. We reflect on precious human life, we reflect on the nature of existence as impermanent, we reflect on the fact that all actions have consequences, the law of karma, and the defaults and the faults of samsara. Right? Or if you're familiar with the Pali discourse called the Upajjhatthana Sutta, the 5 things the Buddha advised us to reflect daily. So again, as I said, the Buddha gave us lots of instructions on how to lead our life. Okay? So that's investigation. So, I just want to conclude on, so I just give you an example here. On a spiritual base, you got about Chanda, Viriya, Chitta, Vimamsa. In a worldly base, I give you an example of, let's say, I think some of you may have companies, so you do business plans, you know. So when we do business plans, so I try to think in terms of the 4 bases of success. All right. So our financial year ends in March. So in fact now we finalize our new business plans for April for the next financial year, and we plan for 5 years. All right. The desire to achieve the target set in the business plan. So you must have that desire, that interest to work out, isn't it? And then the virya, the effort, is the challenge. What challenges would you face? So to do that, you need to have strategic planning and execution. You need to plan. But if you only plan, you don't execute, nothing is going to happen, right? So you not only need to plan, you need to execute. Because if you only spend all your time planning with no execution, in management we call it paralysis by analysis. You heard of this term called paralysis by analysis? Right? And in our company we have a philosophy which is called 60-40 principle. 60-40 principle, which, you know, in my talks, you know, in my talks with all the leaders in our group globally, we said sometimes you cannot have 100% sure of information, right? Can you be 100% sure of everything? You can't. So if you're 60% sure, execute it. And then along the way, you need to change, you change. So we have original budget, we have revised budget, we have forecast budget, we have touchdown. So we have different, all these things I think is to put in the right effort to meet the challenges. So you can actually apply in your in your work. And then the chitta, the mind is, I think, what is very important. At every management briefing, the CEO, you know, we will be telling people, do not lose focus. If you lose focus, you're dead. How do you not lose focus? In other words, you know if what you're doing, you think you're doing very well, but the competitors are already catching up. All right? So what is the competitors doing? So what can we do better? All right? So you do not lose focus in that. And the last one is you review the execution of the business plan against your original goals. So you must have you must always review. So the vimamsa here, the inquiry, isn't it? You inquire. You have a midterm review. Did I do as well? What did I not do right? Right, so you go back to the drawing board. In Japanese, there's a very famous Japanese Zen master called Shunryu Suzuki. He wrote a book called Beginner's Mind. Right? Shunryu Suzuki, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center. My regret, my last trip to San Francisco was that I was not able to visit the San Francisco Zen Center in Hope Street. So, you know, I've always wanted to go there, but it didn't materialize. But Shunryu Suzuki said that in whatever we do, we must cultivate a beginner's mind. What is a beginner's mind? A beginner's mind means that you see things, you try to see things with a fresh pair of eyes, a fresh eyes look. You know, there's an English expression, fresh eyes look. So we have been doing something for the past 10 years, it has been very successful, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful the next 10 years. So revisit it. So you develop what in Zen Buddhism, in Japanese Zen, it's called a beginner's mind. So a beginner's mind means you put aside all your previous preconceptions. Empty your mind, empty your mind. You know, the story of the one with the teacup, you know. Remember you pour the water in the cup, you know, and then the teacup is full, the water keep on flowing. So the person asks the Zen master, hey, the cup is full, why are you still pouring the water? He said, yeah, so is your mind, full of ideas, full of preconceived ideas, So nothing is new is going to go in, isn't it? All right? And today, we're talking about innovation, we talk about adaptation, new things. If you continue to do the same thing, all right? One of my boss used always to say the most stupid thing is to think that just because a guy works for 20 years, he's a very good staff, Because that 20 could be 20 times 1, He could be doing the 20 years, doing the same thing 20 times, 20 years the same thing again. So I think when we look at it from the Buddhist perspective, you can have the Buddhist perspective. Inquiry. So you always inquire. Doesn't mean that whatever you do, always. The Buddha, for example, was a great revolutionary. You notice that the Buddha uses many terms which were used in India at that time, but he gave us a new meaning. Dharma, karma, nirvana. All those terms are not new, Even before the Buddha, those terms were already in India. But when he used the word nirvana, it has a different meaning. When he used the word karma, it has got a different meaning from the Hindus, the Brahmins, and so on. Because he adapted it so that people can understand. Right? So in our organization, we don't use beginner's mind, right? But we use the word creative destruction. Creative destruction. Many years ago when I was in graduate school, there was a book called If It Ain't Broke, Break It. If you Google the title, it's a very interesting title. If it ain't broke, break it. It's an American saying. You see? So last time when I spoke with my American colleagues, when I told them creative destruction, they cannot understand. Beginner's mind also cannot understand. But I say, if it ain't broke, break it. They remember that's a book by an American scholar. You see? All right. So, but of course, I did not want to use the word mimamsa, because then they will not understand that. Okay? So, you can apply this in your daily life, all right, in your business, at work. But today's talk, I've given it a more of a thing. So, my last slide here is to again give you a quote from Dogen. You know who is Dogen? Dogen is a founder of a branch of Japanese Zen called Soto Zen. Soto Zen. Yeah? Those who see worldly life as an obstacle to Dharma see no Dharma in everyday actions. They have not yet discovered that there are no everyday actions outside of Dharma. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh says, that when you're washing dishes, you can also do mindfulness. When you're eating, you can also do mindfulness. When you're walking, you can do mindfulness. When you're sweeping, you can do mindfulness. So Dharma practice is not only when you are here on Sunday or when you are only at the retreat. Okay? So I think what Dogen says in the Shobogenzo is really great for us to remember. So do not see your worldly life as an obstacle to Dhamma. How do you use your worldly life? All right? Because there are no everyday actions outside of Dharma. Everything that we do. Learning to cultivate compassion and kindness and generosity, all those are Dharma, isn't it? And don't we cultivate that in our everyday life? Or you only cultivate loving kindness, compassion, generosity when you're in temples? Of course not, right? So you cultivate all those good qualities when in your everyday life. So that's what Dogen Zenji says. So that's my last slide, I think. Yep. So if you cannot remember all that I said, doesn't matter, just remember that ultimately whatever good things that you have learned in Babs or from some of the Achans or Sayadaw, you must be able to apply it in your everyday life. I think that's the key message.